The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before her mirror adjusting the final touches of her elegant dress. The deep blue fabric shimmered with silver embroidery, each thread carefully chosen to honor centuries of royal tradition. Her hands moved gracefully as she secured the diamond tiara that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, its brilliant stones catching the early light in the next room. Prince William was already dressed in his ceremonial military uniform, the red fabric, adorned with golden braids and medals that told stories of his service and heritage. He checked his pocket watch, a gift from his late grandmother, and smiled at the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Today would mark a new chapter in their family's story, one that would be remembered for generations. Down the hallway, 9-year-old Prince George was trying his best to sit still while his valet helped him with his miniature ceremonial outfit. The young prince kept fidgeting, his excitement barely contained as he thought about the grand ceremony awaiting them. His younger sister, Princess Charlotte, stood nearby in her pristine white dress with blue sash. Watching her brother with the patience of someone wise beyond her 7 years, 5-year-old Prince Louis bounced on his toes, his small hands clasped behind his back as their nanny reminded him about proper behavior during the ceremony. His eyes sparkled with curiosity about all the pageantry he would witness. The youngest of the three had spent weeks practicing his bow and learning when to stand and sit during the long service. Catherine walked into the children's room, her presence immediately calming the morning energy. She knelt down to Louis's level, straightening his tiny tie with motherly care. "Remember what we practiced?" she said softly, her voice carrying both warmth and gentle authority. "Today is very special, and everyone will be watching to see how beautifully you can behave." Out. George looked up at his mother with serious eyes. "Mummy, will there really be thousands of people there?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Catherine smiled and placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the slight tremor of anticipation running through her eldest son. "Darling, but remember, you belong there just as much as anyone else. This is your heritage, your history unfolding," she replied, her words carrying the weight of preparation they had all undergone for this moment.
Oh.
Charlotte stepped closer to her mother, seeking the comfort of her presence before the day's grand events. William appeared in the doorway, his commanding presence filling the room. The children straightened instinctively, not from fear, but from the deep respect they held for their father. He surveyed his family with pride, seeing in them the perfect blend of royal dignity and genuine warmth that would serve them well in the years ahead. "The cars are ready," he announced, though his tone remained gentle for the children's sake. "Today we represent not just ourselves, but everyone who believes in the values our family has protected for over 1,000 years." His words carried the gravity of history, yet his smile reassured his children that they were loved and supported. The family gathered their ceremonial gloves and programs, each item carefully checked by the palace staff who had spent months preparing. For this day, Catherine took one last look in the mirror, not out of vanity, but from the deep understanding that her appearance would be studied and remembered by millions around the world as they prepared to leave their private quarters.
William
gathered his family in a circle. "Whatever happens today, we face it together," he said, his voice strong and certain.
Amir.
The children nodded solemnly, understanding in their own way that they were about to become part of something much larger than themselves. The sound of ceremonial drums could already be heard in the distance, carried on the morning breeze that rustled the ancient trees surrounding their residence. London was awakening to a day that would be marked in history books, and the Wales family stood ready to play their part in the magnificent pageantry that awaited them at Westminster Abbey. The sleek black Bentley waited in the palace courtyard, its polished surface reflecting the morning sky like a dark mirror. Catherine helped the children settle into the luxurious leather seats, while William conferred briefly with their security detail. The weight of the day pressed upon them all, but excitement danced in the children's eyes as they peered through the bulletproof windows. As their convoy pulled away from Kensington Palace, London revealed itself in full ceremonial splendor. Union Jack flags hung from every building, their red, white, and blue colors creating a patriotic canopy over the streets. Thousands of people had gathered along the route, some having camped overnight to secure the best viewing spots for this historic moment. Prince George pressed his face to the window, watching in amazement as crowds of people waved frantically at their passing car. Many held signs with messages of support and love for the royal family. "Look, Mummy," he exclaimed, pointing to a group of children his own age who were jumping up and down with excitement. "They're all here for the same reason we are." Charlotte sat quietly beside her brother, her small hands folded in her lap as she had been taught. But her eyes were wide with wonder at the spectacular display unfolding around them. The streets seemed to pulse with energy, alive with the voices of people singing "God Save the King," and cheering as they recognized the royal convoy approaching. Young Louis could barely contain himself, bouncing slightly in his seat despite his parents' gentle reminders about proper behavior. "Why are there so many people, Papa?" he asked, his voice filled with innocent curiosity. William smiled at his youngest son's enthusiasm, remembering his own childhood wonder at similar events. "Because today is about something bigger than any one person," William explained patiently. "These people are here to celebrate the continuation of something their great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents also celebrated their part of our story, just as we're part of theirs." The convoy moved slowly through the historic streets of London, passing landmarks that had witnessed centuries of royal celebrations. Catherine pointed out famous buildings to the children, sharing stories their grandmother had once told her about past coronations and the families who had made this same journey decades before. As they approached Westminster, the crowds grew thicker and more enthusiastic. Street performers in medieval costumes entertained the waiting masses, while vendors sold commemorative items and flags. The air filled with the sound of church bells ringing across London, their ancient bronze voices calling the city to witness history in the making. Police officers on horseback maintained order along the route, their horses stepping proudly in formation as they had been trained to do for such occasions. Helicopters circled overhead, carrying news cameras that would broadcast these moments to viewers around the world, making everyone feel part of this grand celebration. Catherine reached over and took William's hand, squeezing it gently as they shared a moment of quiet connection amid the public spectacle surrounding them. They both understood the magnitude of what lay ahead, not just for today, but for the years of service that would follow. Their children would grow up in the spotlight, learning to balance private family life with public duty. The ancient spires of Westminster Abbey came into view, rising majestically against the morning sky like stone fingers pointing toward heaven. The building had stood for nearly 1,000 years, hosting the coronations of kings and queens whose names were written in the history books. Their children studied at school. Security motorcycles flanked their car as they made the final approach. To the Abbey, children fell silent, sensing the reverence of the moment. As they gazed upon the Gothic architecture that would frame their family's entrance into this new chapter of royal history, the massive wooden doors stood open, revealing glimpses of the magnificent interior where centuries of British monarchs had been crowned. "Are you ready?" Catherine asked her children softly, her voice carrying both maternal love and the gravity of their shared responsibility. 3 small heads nodded in unison, their faces showing the perfect mixture of excitement and solemnity that the moment demanded. The car slowed to a stop before the Abbey's west entrance. A red carpet stretched from the vehicle to the ancient stone steps. The moment had arrived for the Wales family to step out of their private world and into the public ceremony that would mark this day in the annals of British history. The car door opened with a soft click, and the distant sound of the waiting crowd suddenly became a thunderous roar of approval. William stepped out first, his military uniform catching the morning light as he turned to help Catherine emerge gracefully from the vehicle. Her dress flowed like water as she rose, every movement captured by hundreds of cameras positioned to document this historic moment. Prince George followed his parents, his young face serious with concentration as he remembered his weeks of practice for this very moment. The red carpet beneath his feet felt different from anything he had experienced before, softer and more significant than the palace floors he was accustomed to walking. Behind him, Charlotte stepped out with the poise of someone much older than her 7 years, her white dress pristine, and her posture perfect. Little Prince Louis emerged last, his eyes immediately drawn upward to the towering stone arches of Westminster Abbey. The ancient building seemed to reach toward the clouds. Carved saints and angels watching over the royal family as they had watched over countless ceremonies throughout the centuries. The 5-year-old's mouth opened slightly in wonder at the sheer magnificence of the structure. Archbishop of Canterbury waited at the abbey entrance, his ceremonial robes flowing in the gentle breeze. His warm smile welcomed the family, but his eyes held the gravity of someone who understood the sacred nature of the ritual about to unfold. Behind him, choir members in white surplices stood ready, their voices prepared to lift ancient hymns to the vaulted ceiling. Catherine knelt down, briefly to adjust Louis's collar, her maternal instincts taking over even in this most public of moments. The gesture was captured by photographers, but her focus remained entirely on her youngest child, ensuring he felt secure and loved despite the overwhelming spectacle surrounding them. "Don't remember to walk slowly," she whispered to all 3 children, her voice barely audible above the continuing cheers from the crowd. "This is your abbey too, your heritage. Walk like you belong here because you do." Her words carried the confidence they needed to face the hundreds of distinguished guests waiting inside. The great wooden doors of Westminster Abbey stood open like the entrance to a cathedral of dreams. Inside, shafts of colored light streamed through stained glass windows that had witnessed the coronations of 39 monarchs. The air itself seemed heavy with history, thick with the prayers and celebrations of nearly a millennium. William placed his hand gently on George's shoulder, guiding his eldest son toward the threshold that would mark their official entrance into the ceremony. The boy straightened his spine and lifted his chin, channeling the royal bearing that seemed to come naturally despite his young age. Charlotte took her mother's hand, while Louis walked between his parents, still gazing upward at the magnificent architecture as they approached the abbey entrance. Sound of organ music began to drift from within, its deep bass notes resonating through the ancient stones. The melody was both familiar and otherworldly, a piece composed centuries ago, but still capable of stirring the soul. The royal family paused for just a moment at the threshold, sharing a brief look that acknowledged the magnitude of what they were about to experience. Distinguished guests from around the world had gathered inside the abbey, representing nations and organizations that spanned the globe. Foreign dignitaries, religious leaders, and representatives of charitable organizations filled the historic pews, all united in their respect for the institution and tradition that brought them together. On this remarkable day, the children could see glimpses of the interior through the open doors, catching sight of golden ceremonial objects that gleamed in the candlelight and elaborate floral arrangements that had taken weeks to design and install. Everything had been planned to perfection, yet there remained something deeply spiritual and timeless about the atmosphere that no amount of preparation could manufacture. Catherine squeezed William's hand one final time before they would need to separate according to the ceremony's precise choreography. Their private moment of connection would sustain them through the hours of public ritual ahead, reminding them that beneath all the pageantry, they remained a family united by love and shared purpose. The moment had arrived. Westminster Abbey awaited, its ancient stones ready to witness another chapter in the continuing story of the British monarchy. The Wales family stood poised at the entrance, preparing to walk into history while carrying the hopes and traditions of a nation on their shoulders. With measured steps and hearts full of both excitement and reverence, they crossed the threshold into Westminster Abbey, where centuries of royal history would embrace them and guide them into their future roles. As guardians of Britain's most cherished traditions, the interior of Westminster Abbey enveloped the royal family like a warm embrace from history itself. Soaring Gothic arches stretched toward heaven, their stone ribs decorated with intricate carvings that had taken medieval craftsmen years to complete. Golden light filtered through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the ancient flagstones where kings and queens had walked for nearly 1,000 years. As they entered the nave, the sound of their footsteps echoed softly against the stone walls. Mixing with the gentle murmur of distinguished guests who had traveled from every corner of the earth to witness this ceremony, Catherine felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a connection to all the women who had walked this same path before her. Prince George's eyes widened as he took in the magnificent interior. Elaborate. Banners hung from the columns, each one representing different aspects of the Commonwealth and the various organizations under royal patronage. The boy had studied pictures of the Abbey in preparation for this day, but seeing it filled with people and alive with ceremony was something entirely different from any textbook or photograph. Charlotte walked with careful grace beside her mother, her small hand lightly touching the smooth wood of the pews as they passed. She could see ladies in elegant hats and gentlemen in formal morning dress, all of whom rose respectfully as the royal family made their way toward the front of the Abbey. Their faces showed the same mixture of excitement and reverence that she felt in her own heart. Young Prince Louis continued to gaze upward at the vaulted ceiling, where carved angels seemed to watch over the proceedings with eternal patience. The 5-year-old had never seen anything so grand, and despite all his preparation, he found himself overwhelmed by the sheer scale and beauty of his surroundings. His parents' gentle guidance kept him moving forward, even as his wonder threatened to stop him in his tracks. The choir's voices rose in harmony, filling the Abbey with music that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. Ancient hymns that had been sung at coronations for centuries echoed through the sacred space there. Familiar melodies connecting this moment to all the similar ceremonies that had taken place within these walls. The sound wrapped around the royal family like an invisible cloak of tradition and continuity. Distinguished guests filled every available seat, their presence representing the far reaches of the Commonwealth and beyond. Prime ministers, presidents, religious leaders, and charitable organization heads had all gathered to witness this renewal of the covenant between monarchy and people. Their respectful attention created an atmosphere of profound significance that even the youngest members of the royal family could feel. William walked with the bearing of someone born to this role, yet his eyes occasionally moved to check on his children, ensuring they remained comfortable amid the overwhelming grandeur. He remembered his own childhood experiences at similar ceremonies and felt a deep satisfaction seeing his own children handling themselves with such dignity and composure as they approached the front of the Abbey. The family could see the coronation chair, an ancient wooden throne that had been used for the crowning of British monarchs since the 14th century. The stone of Scone rested beneath its seat, a symbol of unity that connected England with Scotland in an unbroken chain of tradition. Stretching back through the mists of time, Catherine noticed how the light streaming through the great east window illuminated the altar area with an almost ethereal glow. The sacred vessels and ceremonial objects gleamed with the patina of age and the polish of careful maintenance. Everything had been prepared according to traditions that had been refined and perfected over hundreds of years. The children took their designated seats in the front row, their training evident in how naturally they settled into position despite the magnitude of their surroundings. George sat with his back straight and his hands folded properly in his lap, while Charlotte smoothed her dress and arranged herself with the unconscious grace of someone raised in royal protocols from birth. Louis, though younger and more prone to fidgeting, seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment. He sat quietly between his siblings, his small hands clasped together as he had been taught, his eyes still occasionally drifting upward to take in the magnificent ceiling that arched high above their heads like the vault of heaven itself. The moment had arrived for the ceremony to begin in earnest. William and Catherine took their positions according to the careful choreography that had been rehearsed for months. The Abbey fell silent except for the soft rustling of formal clothes and the distant sound of crowds still gathering outside, their voices carrying through the ancient stones. Westminster Abbey stood ready to witness another chapter in the long story of British monarchy, its sacred walls prepared to hold the prayers and promises that would shape the future of a nation and its people. The ceremony began with the deep, resonant tones of the Abbey's great organ, its ancient pipes filling the sacred space with music that seemed to emerge from the very foundations of the building. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward, his ceremonial vestments catching the light as he raised his hands to address the assembled congregation. His voice carried clearly through the abbey, speaking words that had been refined and perfected through centuries of royal coronations. Catherine watched with quiet intensity as the ritual unfolded before them, each element carrying symbolic weight that connected this moment to an unbroken chain of tradition stretching back through generations of British monarchs. The children sat perfectly still, their earlier training evident in how naturally they maintained their composure despite the overwhelming grandeur surrounding them. The choir's voices rose, in harmony, singing ancient hymns that had echoed through these stone walls for nearly 1,000 years. Their music seemed to lift the ceremony beyond the earthly realm, creating an atmosphere where the sacred and temporal merged into something larger than any individual person or moment. The sound enveloped the royal family like an embrace from history itself. Prince George leaned forward slightly, his young mind processing the significance of what he was witnessing. He had studied the ceremony in preparation for this day, but experiencing it firsthand was something entirely different from reading about it in books. The boy could feel the weight of generations watching over him, a presence almost tangible in the ancient stones and carved angels that surrounded them. Charlotte sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap as she had been taught, but her eyes moved constantly to take in every detail of the magnificent spectacle. The 7-year-old had always been fascinated by history, and now she found herself living inside one of the most important historical moments of her lifetime. The responsibility felt both thrilling and sobering. Young Prince Louis remained remarkably still for a 5-year-old, though his eyes continued to wander upward to the vaulted ceiling where carved saints and angels seemed to watch over the proceedings with eternal patience. The magnitude of the ceremony had captured even his active imagination, holding him in a state of wonder that his parents had rarely seen before. William stood at attention during the appropriate moments, his military training evident in his bearing, but his heart was full of emotion as he witnessed the continuation of traditions that had shaped his entire life. He thought of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, and how proud she would have been to see her great-grandchildren participating so beautifully in this sacred ceremony. The sacred vessels were brought forward, each one polished to perfection and gleaming in the light that streamed through the stained glass windows. These objects had been used in coronations for centuries, their weight and beauty a testament to the craftsmanship of generations past. The ceremony's choreography unfolded with precision, every movement planned and practiced to ensure seamless execution. Distinguished guests from around the world watched with respectful attention as the ancient words were spoken and the timeless rituals performed. Prime ministers, presidents, and religious leaders had all gathered to witness this renewal of the covenant between monarchy and people, their presence representing the global significance of this moment in British history. Catherine felt the profound responsibility settling upon her shoulders as she witnessed the ceremony's most sacred moments. She understood that she was not just watching history unfold, but actively participating in its creation. Her children would carry these memories throughout their lives, and someday they would guide their own children through similar moments of national significance. The ceremony reached its crescendo as the most ancient and sacred elements were performed, according to traditions that had been carefully preserved through centuries of change and challenge. The Archbishop's voice carried the weight of history as he spoke words that had been refined through generations of use, each phrase polished by time and repetition until it achieved perfect clarity and meaning. Sunlight streaming through the great east window seemed to intensify during the ceremony's most solemn moments, as if nature itself was acknowledging the significance of what was taking place within the abbey's ancient walls. The light fell across the altar area like a benediction, illuminating the sacred objects and ceremonial vestments with an almost ethereal glow. The children remained perfectly behaved throughout the lengthy ceremony, their weeks of preparation evident in how naturally they maintained their composure despite the overwhelming nature of their surroundings. They had become part of something much larger than themselves, contributing their own small but essential role to this grand continuation of British royal tradition. As the ceremony approached its conclusion, the abbey seemed to hold its breath, in anticipation of the final moments that would mark this day in the annals of history. Westminster Abbey stood ready to release another chapter of the British monarchy, into the world, its ancient stones having witnessed and blessed another generation's commitment to service and tradition. As the final hymn faded into the stone arches of Westminster Abbey, a profound silence settled over the ancient sanctuary. The ceremony had reached its conclusion, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with significance and the weight of history that had just been made. Catherine felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, moved by the beauty and solemnity of what they had all just witnessed and participated in. The royal family rose from their seats with the quiet dignity that had marked their behavior throughout the entire ceremony. Prince George straightened his ceremonial outfit, his young face reflecting a new understanding of the magnitude of his heritage. The boy had entered the abbey as a child. Something in his bearing suggested he was beginning to emerge with a deeper comprehension of his future responsibilities. Charlotte smoothed her white dress and checked to ensure her appearance remained perfect for the cameras that would capture their exit from the abbey. The 7-year-old had watched every moment of the ceremony with intense focus, storing away memories that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Her natural grace seemed even more pronounced now, as if the ancient rituals had awakened something regal within her spirit. Young Prince Louis had managed to sit still through the entire lengthy ceremony, a feat that impressed even his parents, who knew how challenging such extended periods of formal behavior could be for an active 5-year-old. His wonder at the magnificent surroundings had kept him transfixed, and now he moved with the careful precision his family had taught him for such occasions. William placed a gentle hand on his eldest son's shoulder as they prepared to process out of the abbey, the gesture conveying both paternal pride and the passing of generational responsibility. The future king looked upon his children with deep satisfaction, seeing in them the perfect balance of royal dignity and genuine humanity that would serve them well in the years ahead. The distinguished guests began to rise from their seats. The royal family prepared to make their ceremonial exit. Faces from around the world watched with respectful admiration as this British family demonstrated the timeless appeal of traditions that had weathered centuries of change while maintaining their essential character and dignity. As they walked back down the nave, the children could see how the ceremony had transformed the abbey's atmosphere. The same magnificent architecture remained, but something ineffable had changed. As if the ancient stones themselves had absorbed the sacred energy of the ritual they had just witnessed, the building seemed even more alive with history than when they had first entered. Catherine walked with renewed grace, feeling the weight of her role not as a burden, but as a sacred trust passed down through generations of royal women who had served their country with dedication and love. Her connection to this place and these traditions felt deeper now, rooted in something more profound than mere ceremony or pageantry. The great doors of Westminster Abbey stood open once again, revealing glimpses of the thousands of people still gathered outside to catch a glimpse of the royal family as they emerged from this historic ceremony. The sound of cheering crowds drifted into the sacred space, a reminder that the private spiritual moment was about to become a public celebration. Once again, sunlight streamed through the doorway, creating a path of golden light that seemed to beckon the family forward into their future. The contrast between the ancient, candlelit interior and the bright, modern world waiting outside symbolized the eternal challenge of monarchy. Maintaining timeless traditions while remaining relevant to contemporary society, the children walked with measured steps toward the exit, their training evident in how naturally they maintained their ceremonial pace despite the excitement of the crowds they could hear gathering beyond the abbey doors. Each step brought them closer to the moment when they would emerge from this sacred space and return to their public roles as members of Britain's royal family. As they approached the threshold, William and Catherine exchanged a look that spoke of shared purpose and mutual support. They had entered Westminster Abbey as a family, participating in an ancient ceremony, and they were about to emerge as renewed guardians of traditions that would guide them through whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The moment arrived for them to step from the sacred interior into the bright daylight, where thousands of well-wishers waited to celebrate with them. Westminster Abbey had once again fulfilled its ancient purpose, blessing another generation of British royalty and sending them forth to serve their nation with wisdom, compassion, and unwavering dedication. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis walked beside their parents toward the Abbey doors, their young lives forever marked by this experience of participating in one of Britain's most sacred and enduring traditions. They carried with them not just memories of magnificent pageantry, but a deeper understanding of the service and sacrifice that would define their futures as members of the royal family. The great doors opened fully, and the Wales family stepped together into the cheering embrace of a nation celebrating the continuation of traditions that connected past, present, and future in an unbroken chain of service, duty, and love for the British people.